Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our City Council work session. For the record, I'd like to call this meeting to order, and today's date is March 15th at 4:33 p.m. And the first order of business will be roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. President. Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Councilman Borton.
Here.
Councilwoman Pro.
Here.
Councilman Borton.
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here. All right, next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Councilman Borton.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda. Striking item number 15 will be pulled. Replacement item on 322. With that change, I move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to adopt the agenda as amended. Is there any discussion? If not, all those say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, next item is the consent agenda.
Mr. President,
Councilman Borton.
I'd like to move to approve the consent agenda for the council president to sign and for the clerk to attest.
Second.
A motion, a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
And that was all ayes. Consent agenda is approved. No items were moved from the consent agenda, so the next item is department and commission reports. Up first, we'll hear from our Solid Waste Advisory Commission and their annual update. And Steve, you can take us away.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. I am Steve Corey, Chairman of the Solid Waste Advisory Commission. I'm here representing the commission to report on our 2021 activities. I bring you their best wishes, and the commission has appreciated being at full staff this year. Commissioner Meg Larson served as vice chair. Isabel Cow completed 2 years of stellar service as a youth commissioner. And we are pleased to welcome Kaylee Philippi as the current youth commissioner who's in attendance. One of our primary responsibilities is the Community Recycling Fund program. The fund had an initial balance this year of just under $39,000. Revenues this last year were just over $13,500 from the Hand in Hand We Recycle program. This year, there was one expenditure of $1,633 for a squishy water bottle pilot program. The ending balance for the year is $50,641. Other calendar year 21 activities included Trash or Treasure, Recycle a Bicycle, participation in the Ada County Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and participation in the Ada County Household Hazardous Waste quarterly meetings. I want to highlight SWAC's continuing work to develop a solid waste plan for the city. SWAC worked with the city staff to finalize the goals and expectations for the plan. And SWAC looks forward to staff presenting the plan to us and the opportunity to provide advice and consultation to finalize and implement a plan. SWAC also conducted its other primary responsibility, the review of the FY22 annual solid waste rate adjustment. The rate adjustment for both commercial and residential services was comprised of the contractual CPI adjustment, a fee to cover a significant spike in labor costs, and the continuance of sharing recycle processing costs as set forth in a separate contract amendment. Amongst others, SWAC received presentations on contamination issues at the recycling containers at the transfer station, the squishy water bottle pilot program reports, and discussion about collection of glass over in the city of Eagle, and the just mentioned FY22 proposed solid waste rates. Upcoming commission business includes furthering improvements in the recycling efforts, promoting Meridian's Trash or Treasure hand in hand and the Recycle Bicycle program, monitoring yard composting market trends, and construction demolition waste diversion efforts, and a continued focus on reducing contamination of recycle streams, continuing participation in the Ada County Solid Waste Advisory Committee, continued participation in the Ada County Household Hazardous Waste Program meetings, and continued expansion of education outreach to decrease contamination in the commingled residential recycled streams, with emphasis on new residents and including youth. In conclusion, SWAC was active despite COVID. Our commitment is steadfast to work in partnership with staff and Republic Services to identify and recommend to you improved fiscally sound trash and recycling services and programs for the benefit of Meridian residents and commercial customers. And with that, I would certainly like questions about what's in the report.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Questions for Steve?
Mr. President.
Councilwoman Pro.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for being here. I was curious if you could share more about what you've learned with monitoring the yard composting market trends. I know the Boise offers that, and I'm curious what Meridian residents have had to say, or if you've done any kind of outreach on that regard.
Well, our primary indicator on that is the subscription process that we've got, that individuals can go ahead and pay for curbside pickup. And it's held steady, but we have at this point, find my 170 subscribers. That's up from 134 last year, but understanding at this point, we have about 40,000 active household accounts. So we're looking for more interest before we go somewhere. As far as what's going on within the valley, the big inclusion was the Boise City's composting program over there. And of course, that one was a mandatory program where everyone was participating. And it's suffered on one side having more material than they could handle, and they've had to go through a major expansion over there, but they've been consuming all of their capacity to go ahead and treat material. And then also with the produced material, they've also had that oversubscribed as far as people wanting compost for their home use. So we're basically just kind of watching to see if there's a kind of a change in economics or a change in consumer interest and more people wanting to get involved. And hopefully that's useful.
Mr. President, I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Pro.
Thank you. In your report, you had mentioned that that was for curbside grass pickup. So I didn't know if you were tying that in with composting or if that was something that was separate. Is that the same as, I guess I think of composting as like
Mr.
products from your home that you're, allowing to decompose.
Yes, that is essentially the same program, two names for the same thing, that the program within the city of Meridian has only allowed receipt of grass and leaves in the fall, but it hasn't been expanded to any type of material for composting at this time.
Mr. President.
Yes, Councilwoman Strader.
It's great to see you, Chairman Corey. And I guess I just have two questions along the same lines, maybe more of a comment, but I think it'd be great to see a pilot program around composting just to see the interest. I know Republic looked at it, we looked at it, timing wasn't quite ready. But it'd be great. And I guess I was curious if you guys would be addressing potential composting plans in your upcoming solid waste plan and what the latest timing is on just generally what we're thinking about receiving the plan.
Councilwoman, thank you for that question, Mr. President. Yes, the waste plan will go ahead and take a look at the waste that's generated by our citizens and discuss each of the different categories of it. I'm appreciative of our staff support. Sayard Schultz is going to be responsible for drafting that plan, and I with that, basically, we're always encouraging people to go ahead and, approach us if they've got something that they could perhaps do. Certainly, I would kind of give that background information that I did to indicate we probably shouldn't be looking at being able to attach to Boise, because I don't believe they're ever going to have capacity to take our material, but something that obviously throwing in that piece of information while the landfill, when it was developed up at Hidden Hollow, was supposed to last 100 years. It's already reduced down to about 60 to 70 years. And so it's always on our mind to go ahead and look at streams that can be diverted, to go ahead and extend that so that our kids or grandkids are not having to pay for a new landfill, because that creation of a new landfill is a pretty significant cost and a pretty significant tax burden.
Mr. President,
Councilwoman Strader.
I guess just one quick follow-up, just timing, if we know, maybe we don't know yet, but timing of the solid waste plan or the report that you guys are working on. I know there's a city solid waste plan that staff was working on. I was just curious about the timing when we might see that. And then I just wanted to pay you a compliment, my absolute favorite commission that I've ever been on. And I think your work's really important and appreciate everybody's dedication.
Thank you so much. Sayard, do you feel comfortable at this point projecting a time for that report, or is it still a little early for the plan?
All right, go ahead and state your name for the record.
Sayard Schultz, Solid Waste Coordinator. We are working on the city staff are working on an outline right now, so I'm hoping to get that done around September, and then submit it to SWAC for any advice that they would want to include, comments.
Councilwoman Strader, do you have a follow-up?
Just wanted to make sure I heard, was it September?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Thank you. Steve, I have a question. You mentioned recycling, and kind of curious as to, I mean, it's hard to predict the future, but what are the recycling markets doing? What does it look like they might do? And you also mentioned contaminations. And can you tell us a little bit more what's going on with contamination and recycling, and what the problem is, and what the plans are to work on that?
First, on the markets, we actually started to see some recovery this year. Obviously, there's been a lot of struggles in the past few years with China changing what they wanted to go ahead and take and what they wanted to do, and just trying to create domestic markets and such. And through the fiscal year, at the end of the fiscal year, we were almost at we were very much approaching where the additional cost was zeroing out. But in the last quarter, it's kind of softened again a little bit, but hopefully we're going to be able to start seeing some recovery in that market. And the particular situation we had this year was Republic Services has been very supportive in creating a number of containers out at the transfer station, which is very helpful to our apartment residents and similar that don't have curbside recycling. And of course, it allows for a drop-off process for any resident that might have a lot more recycling than what they can fit in their cart. And for a while, there seemed to be a bit of a problem on what was going into the bins. There were a few loads that were problems. And Republic volunteered, came up with us, told us about the problem, and went ahead and identified that they were going to improve the signage around the bins. And it actually was very helpful. It seemed to clear up the problem immediately. So that was one particular problem. I think in all of our cases, we tend to go ahead and see 5 or 10% contamination in the streams, and with where Western goes for customers for our material, that's acceptable. But if we were able to go ahead and reduce that for 3% contamination or something like that, we can go for more elite manufacturing facilities that would pay us more for our materials. So unfortunately, the goal is 0, and we always strive to get to 0, but there's always more work to be done.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Great. Thank you, Steve. And please to our committee members, we thank them for their service. We appreciate it very much. And they got a big fan in Councilwoman Strader.
Thank you so much.
We removed item 15 that I think was going to be heard on March 22nd. So next up, we have from the mayor's office, discussion to plan the use of Federal American Rescue Plan Act funds, also known as ARPA. So Dave Miles, if you could come up and fill us in.
Good afternoon, Council. So this categorizes as ARPA Part 2, or maybe 3 or 4. I forget where we've left off, but we were last back with you, I think in September. So we'll go through some discussion tonight. Really, I think what we want to touch on tonight is ultimately the considerations that we've all talked about at the leadership level since the last time we came and talked to you all about projects, as well as the approach that we're considering as we think about these projects moving forward. I think that's important to touch on. And then ultimately try and seek some approval on project recommendations, or at least some feedback from you all, and go from there. But I think what's most important, I think, is sort of the philosophy of these dollars. I know there's a lot of discussion about these are really generational funds, probably once in a lifetime, maybe once in multi-generational dollars. And whether or not you sit on the fence of the federal government expending these funds or not, I think ultimately for Meridian, the biggest component to consider is that whether or not we spend these funds, they've been allocated. And the guidance that we're seeing right now will dictate that if money's unspent, it will likely go back to the feds and states and or other cities. And so the money's going to get spent. So how do we as Meridian recommend to spend these funds for the best benefit of the Meridian community is sort of how we've looked at that. Also want to just consider the impact on staff with any of these projects that we undertake. We saw with a small business program as an example. We can do it, we can make it work, but there is an impact on staff, and it's a bit of a resource draw. There's also been some changes that we'll go through and talk about, and then I want to touch on the timelines as well, because it's important to remember with any of these projects, there are timelines to these federal funds. So as the legislature got underway this past session, they rolled out their ARPA suggested funding and their path. And I think that a lot of their message resonates across the state, as well as when we're thinking about our projects. I think they laid out a prudent path of consideration of how to consider the funds. And really it's utilizing these funds for long-term capital projects, not trying to designate funds for ongoing costs, because again, these are one-time funds. So if we're designating them to ongoing costs, we're gonna have to turn around and figure out a way to fund those anyway in the future again. Again, the money is on the backs of generations to come. So what are those long-term projects that will not only serve good for today in today's community, but 10, 15, 30, 40 years down the road? Those are some of the philosophies that we considered as we looked at these projects. And ultimately, it's about lowering future ongoing operational costs, lowering the long-term tax benefits, the tax liabilities if we can, and making those improvements that have as broad an impact as possible. That's some of the thinking that we took as we were moving through this discussion. So a couple of reminders. Federal program, roughly $350 billion was allocated. Idaho's portion of that was right around $1.1 billion. That goes to the state and what they called non-entitled units, which was populations less than, I want to say 50,000. Meridian received a direct infusion directly allocated to Meridian, $12.8 million, a little more than that. And the timelines that are associated with that funding, again, I touched on those earlier. So we have to allocate funding to any project by December 2024, a little more than 2.5 years. I'm thinking that's the right date. And then we have to spend those funds by December 2026. So it, 4.5 years-ish. Sounds like a long time, but when you look at the list of some of these projects, they're big projects. They take time. Some of these projects you're looking at a year in design potentially, a good chunk of time to get under contract, and then 2 to 3 years of construction. So that's why we wanted to come in front of you and try to get some of these projects moving forward if you're agreeable with them. Next couple of slides, I'm not going to spend too long on because you've got the information in your packet. We've also talked about this before, but essentially 4 main categories that we can spend those funds on, and you can see them listed here, supporting the COVID pandemic and economic response associated with that. Premium pay, eligible essential workers, government services, which is categorized under the revenue loss bucket of money, and then investing in water, sewer, and broadband. A little bit of details on what those means. We've talked about those before. So anything from testing to nursing care costs to mitigating COVID communications, all of those types of things are eligible in the first bucket. Premium pay, exactly like it says, HEROES Act, nursing home staff pay, back pay, things of that nature, which we're not recommending any of that at this point. Providing government services, this is sort of the revenue loss allocation that you've all been informed about and we've talked about in the past, and then investing in water and sewer and broadband. Those 2 categories are probably your most open categories is how I would describe them. The revenue loss is basically any government service is how they categorize it. So very broad, very open. And in the guidance, they direct cities and municipalities and agencies to think that this guidance is to be loosely and broadly interpreted. So a lot of options in that category. With the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds as guidance for water, sewer, and broadband projects. They're 2 significantly sized documents that have a long list of projects. So again, feel like there's a lot of flexibility in that category as well. So the biggest change in the guidance that came out in the final guidance was probably around the revenue loss calculation. So when we were before you in September last, we talked about $4.6 million more or less being able to be allocated to revenue loss projects or government services projects. The federal treasury guidance has since come out based on all of the feedback they've received during their interim guidance before they publish final guidance, and said that they're offering what they're calling a standard calculation, a standard deduction, more or less, to take up to $10 million in revenue loss without having to go through any calculation. Cities, agencies can just say, we're going to take a full $10 million of our allocation and set that to revenue loss. So that is a change that we've seen since the interim guidance. So that $10 million is also inclusive of the total package. So up to 10 million of the 12.8 can be allocated to revenue loss projects. Some other changes, again, they've expanded sort of the non-exhaustive example lists in their guidance to help people understand what projects can be used for. And then they've streamlined options on how to work through if you're considering premium pay, and as well as water, sewer, and broadband options. The broadband guidance has changed. In fact, we got some information late last week, earlier this week, that there's ongoing conversations around that. So that's why you'll see in the packet that showed up in phase 2 discussion area as well. And so now in your packets, you've got attachments A and B, which jump into the projects. And so when we considered these projects, we met with the director team, Councilwoman Strader, Councilman Borton were part of those discussions to evaluate what are the buckets of projects we even want to consider. So we developed that list through multiple conversations, worked through, you saw on, I believe it's attachment A, some of the projects filtered off of the list, but we kept them on there for you to see them. For example, I think we had a discussion about Anderson Ranch Dam raise. it's just not going to fit in the timeline of this project. So right out of the gate, we said, well, that probably doesn't work for us because of timeline alone, if not the rest of the complexity, just as an example. So we are recommending phase one projects to move forward at your approval. Starting with facility HVAC, it stands for needlepoint bipolar ionization. It's basically improved air filtration in the city facilities. We cover all city facilities to the tune of about $160,000 to make improvements to the HVAC system. This was originally born out of COVID. I think it still applies. If COVID were to come back, it keeps improved air quality. In theory, it helps us continue to operate our facilities, have people in the building, whether they're customers or employees. That's the thinking behind that one. You've got COVID testing is on there to consider offering testing to employees. We've got some quotes from the fire department on those types of services through third-party contract services. We also have on there the benefits trust COVID impacts repayment. You saw last week you had a budget amendment in front of you for the trust repayment, of which about $190,000 was related to COVID impacts. This wouldn't necessarily repay the trust or repay the city for those funds. What it would do is allocate this amount of money for the city to expend on projects that money was going to be used for. And that's an important distinction when you get into the federal guidance of how these funds are utilized. And it's not that you're repaying a fund or repaying reserves, it's that you're utilizing these funds for projects that you would have otherwise used general fund money for, but we no longer have that. And then going down the list, we have biosolids drying through the water sewer projects. Cybersecurity is a new project that was on the list that is not in our current CFP, but because of the best practices from IT and how you handle SCADA versus city infrastructure, they're currently tied together, is my understanding. And the best practice recommendation is to pull those apart and treat them on separate server farms. So that is new recommendation, and you would see that coming from IT in the next few years anyway, because they don't currently have it in the CFP, and it is now the best practice. And then there's energy efficiency studies, both through the utilities and with city facilities. We broke it out to bucketize money into water, sewer, broadband, and to bucketize other money into revenue loss. And then streetlights upgrades are in there as well. Originally in attachment A was at $1.5 million. Through conversations, we did lower it to $1 million as a starting point. A little bit of that is related to just staffing resources and sort of effectiveness of how far can we get. Knowing that there's still money left over in theory, starting with $1 million felt like a prudent step to say, how far can we get? How much can we do? Rather than just saying, let's just do $1.5 million and then maybe we can't get there. That was the rationale. Total of about $6.8 million worth of projects in that first phase bucket. And you can see phase two, another $6 million roughly for the other, what I call larger projects that I think council probably warrants a further discussion on, more consideration on. I don't know, ready to take action on those tonight, great. But you can see them there. Linda Road overpass is something that I know the mayor supports. And we've had several discussions on that, again, considering its broad impacts to the community. Also considering setting aside a portion, the recommendation is $2.5 million to start, as just a set aside to say, if any of these other projects go over cost, or if there are other project ideas that we have, or if heaven forbid COVID or some variant of COVID comes back and we need some sort of emergency funding for these funds to cover. That's the intent behind that. We've got the community center is on the list as well. What do we do with that? Knowing that there's some funds in the existing CFP. Golf course irrigation, the same discussion as is the regional parkland. This would be for a future park site in Northwest Meridian where the Fields District is. Don't know where we stand on that at this point. And then broadband is up there as well, because I mentioned there's some continuing discussions occurring again throughout the region and the valley about how and what could we do as a regional approach to improve broadband. I know IT under the newest guidance has considered maybe there are some ideas that we could do. And I think it's not ripe enough to have a conversation today to say like what, but for instance, whether it's broadband in the park or trying to connect fire stations through broadband that we don't currently have, those types of ideas. This slide just breaks out into what buckets those phase one projects fit in, just so that you can see the categorization. We've got about 360,000, 365 in the COVID response bucket right now. We've got about 1.1 million in the revenue loss bucket. and about 5.3 in the water sewer broadband bucket of what we're proposing for today. And what does that leave? I touched on this a little bit. We would propose to leave, that would leave 2.5 million in sort of reserves for future discussion. You've got in the revenue loss bucket, you've got Linda Road Overpass, Community Center, Regional Park, and then through water, sewer, and broadband, you've got a broadband project, again, cost to be determined. And then you've got golf course irrigation. And I think it does fit in that bucket appropriately if you consider the state drinking water, state revolving fund guidance. A lot of acronyms in this guidance. Again, we're recommending roughly 6.8 million for those phase 1 projects, either all or a piece or part. We can have that discussion, knowing that that would leave about $6 million for future discussions on the phase 2 projects, future discussions, maybe a full body input, because I know there's several members that are not here, along with setting aside some funds for things that we just may not know yet. I think that's the entirety of the presentation, knowing that I did want to add one thing. Through any of these approvals that you give tonight, obviously any project by itself would have to come back for a budget amendment to allocate the funds. So you would have a further conversation on each individual project as they come back. I think with that, I'll stand. Any questions?
Thank you, Dave. So to that point, so basically for phase 1 list, it would be just kind of a blanket approval as you meant, and then they come back, as you mentioned, and actual allocate and have questions and make sure everything, all the details are taken care of, correct?
Yep, that's correct, Council President.
Okay. Any questions for Dave?
Mr. President,
Yes, Councilwoman Pro.
thank you. I have 3 questions for you, Dave. Try to do it succinctly. Can you share about just sort of big picture, some of the reasons why some of the items are in phase 1 versus phase 2 as far as timing goes? So in phase 2, we have some projects that are already in the process. But in phase 1, there are items that, are just getting started. So can you help me understand what got put in what bucket and kind of some thoughts behind it? I did read through everything that was in the packet, by the way, but just want to understand what the decisions were as far as which phase they went into. And then along those same lines, the criteria for phase 2, is that going to be similar to phase 1 where we're looking at return on investment, how that lines up kind of with, in phase 2, I imagine we'll be also having some discussions about partially using general fund budgets for some of those projects, and whether timing of the projects will play into phase 2 as much as they will into phase 1. So
Sure.
Just kind of a bigger picture in that regard. That's my first question.
Okay. Council President, Councilwoman Pro. So to what I heard, your first question. So why project phase 1 versus phase 2 on some of these? Really, I think part of the consideration is what do we think there's more general support for overall, as well as what are some of the immediate operational projects that can offer operational savings and long-term benefit to the community. I think if you look at the list of projects, in phase 1, there's a lot of projects that do at least analyze and provide a return on investment that are calculable, right? We can touch and see and feel that if we install X streetlights, it will provide a reduction of Y in costs. If you look at the list in phase 2, you've sort of got more of the less tangible benefits, right? We can measure traffic flow, but how much benefit does Linda Road Overpass have versus the attendance of a community center? Those are more conversational, ethereal, not necessarily touchable and calculable in my mind. So that was some of the logic behind why those projects. Additionally, some of them are just easier, simpler projects, I think. So we know that we can sort of get the ball moving on some of these, get them underway. To your next question about the criteria and that we consider, I think, yes, we consider the same criteria. Sort of what is the long-term community benefit? What's the return on investment, so to speak, if it is able to be calculated? What's the complexity of them and the timing of them? I think if you look at any of those projects on the phase 2 list, you could argue that they are all complex and could take long if you think of them from start to finish. Now, within them, there are probably elements that you could consider breaking down and say, well, for example, Linda Road Overpass, we could acquire right away sooner than later. Community center, maybe there's a study to be done sooner than later. So there are elements of them that are short-term, but they are all much longer term as well. I think. And then timing of projects, I think I touched on that a little bit as well. Again, they're bigger projects. So yes, we need to have the discussion soon. I think it's just a little more tangible of the phase 1 projects to say, let's get those going. Or some.
Mr. President, may I continue with a couple more questions?
Go ahead, Councilwoman Pro.
Thank you. So thank you very much for sharing that. So what I'm hearing is phase 1 are projects that really we can immediately pick up, and phase 2 are projects where we might still need some more information or planning to be ready to move forward with. Is that right?
Council President Hoagland. There's also more discussion to be had on them, I think.
Okay. I agree. So are there any long-term maintenance costs for the capital projects in phase 1 that would need to be added to the base budgets? Has there been any analysis done of additional costs to equipment or staffing or maintenance that might be involved with the biosolids drying or the SCADA improvements, et cetera, that we need to take into account as part of this?
Council President Hoagland and Councilwoman Pro. I think of the list up there in terms of what would be added operational costs or added, additional operations. You'd look at the biosolids and the SCADA to some degree, possibly the streetlights. Do have Lorelei McNair, Public Works Director, is here. I do think that the ROI did take some of that into consideration. So they did, she's not in her head, yes, so on the record, yes. The ROA does consider that ongoing operational cost in terms of whether or not it requires additional staffing or not. And that calculation brings that into factor.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Lorelei would like to join us because my next question is about streetlights. So in chatting with
Councilwoman Pro, I thought that was Councilwoman Strader's question. No.
Hey, I'm the
Happy
Public
to
Works
have somebody
liaison
else
now.
ask it.
Thank you. So it's my understanding that we've been a little slower than we had hoped for with streetlight installation and changeover. And so I was wondering if you could give us some more feedback on whether the $1 million should stay in phase 1 or phase 2 and sort of the timing of that. Not so much whether it's a valid project, but just the timing of it and implementation.
Councilwoman Pro, great question. So it is a resource constraint for us from a personnel standpoint. So if we were to be allocated this $1 million, we are anticipating hiring a consulting firm to help us manage this project in that time frame. So definitely doable, but probably not doable with internal resources. And so part of that money would go towards consultant fees.
Mr. President,
Councilwoman Strader.
I have a question for Lorelei as well. Thanks for being here. If you had to choose between the streetlight conversion and the biogas energy conversion, which one do you think provides a better return on investment?
And Lorelei, while you're pondering that, you said biogas facility or biosolids?
Yeah, that's correct. So there is a biogas energy conversion project that I actually am surprised not to see on, at least on phase 2 for further discussion. It is an interesting project that uses our existing, basically like the yucky smells that you smell. They could burn those and actually use that energy to a greater extent at the wharf. And the nice thing about that project is it's pretty quick project to implement and would immediately save us $100,000 per year. Just back of the envelope, looks like a pretty okay return on investment just from eyeballing it. But and I'm just devil's advocate. If we're having trouble keeping up with streetlights, I guess I'm curious if had to choose one or the other, if one of them is a preference. Oh, I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, but I was just curious. What do you think?
Lorelei, any thoughts on that?
Councilman Strader, without doing, I guess, some more in-depth analysis. So we see on the biogas energy conversion project about $100,000 annual savings there. I believe that the street lights Thank you. The streetlights would be between $65,000 and $79,000 a year. So I think based on that, close.
Yeah, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Yeah, really close. I guess maybe if I had one piece of feedback, I'm in support of phase one projects. I think they make a lot of sense. As somebody that helped a little bit on this, there's a ton of vetting that went into these projects. These ones are very tangible, like they're really practical projects, like kind of like, you do your home maintenance on your house to avoid your water heater exploding. Like they're similar, but at a city scale to me. I would just ask that the biogas project be a possible consideration for phase two, because it is an immediate savings. It is calculable. It doesn't have an ongoing operating cost besides the depreciation of that equipment. Like, to me, that's a really good project. That's a practical project. And I do want to give some other feedback. I agree with Councilwoman Pro's comment that on the phase two projects, we do have things that are pretty tangible that we're interested in doing. So I think it's great to have that further discussion. And maybe that's an opportunity if other council members that aren't here have other ideas that have come up recently or other feedback, those could be vetted in the meantime. I know Councilman Kavanagh had an idea that he mentioned to me, and it's just not something that came up. So I think that this is a good approach. Knock out the really practical ones that save the city money on an ongoing basis. And then definitely we're having big discussions for that phase two. And Mr. President, maybe one more question.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Strader.
Dave, like from us, are you looking for feedback? Are you looking for like a voice vote? Maybe that's easy not right now, but when we're ready, a voice vote tonight on support for these phase one things. So you have clarity. Just want to make sure we're sensitive, because this thing's been morphing around and you've been putting a lot of work into it. I just want to make sure we're getting you what you need tonight.
Council President, Councilwoman Strayer, yes, ultimately, a voice vote would be good, whether it's line by line or whether it's a bucket of phase one and say, yep, it's good to go. Again, you will see them again on individual projects as they come back for amendments to allocate the funds. Gives you another opportunity. But again, with the timing and the length of some of these projects, it's good to get some of them underway to get them moving forward.
Okay. I want to note for the record that Councilman Borton has joined us from being online to in person. So thank you, Councilman. Councilman Borton, did you have any thoughts?
Mr. President, so thank you. I listened en route to the conversation and presentation. I just think there's a lot of good work that's been done to get us to this point by a lot of different invested individuals in all of the different options. So for me, I think the phase one basket is something that I'm supportive of. That going forward, understanding there's budget amendments and the details will come and follow the spending authority, but I'm supportive of phase one, understanding there's more discussions for how the remainder of the bucket can be allocated. There's additional options, I think, that even in that list, but to move the ball a bit, I think phase one is good to go forward with me today.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Burt.
Thank you, Dave, for the presentation. I think that phase one looks good for the most part. My thoughts on phase two are specific to the Linda Road overpass. I think that community needs this. I think that it's been a high priority for the mayor and council for a while, even, started with previous, former Mayor DeVeard. And so my only question is timing. Some of these projects are contingent upon timing. And if we, would we have time for a phase two project like Linda Road overpass if we were to include that in phase two in the future?
Council President Hoagland and Councilman Burke. I think that's where I look forward to the future discussions. I think there's, again, to the comment I made to Councilwoman Pro, I think if you break a project down and look at it in components, yes, there's the ability to fit something of that project into the timing that's the Treasury has set, whether that's things like buying right away or helping accelerate the purchase of right away or accelerating the construction of a specific component. You certainly have to do more work looking into how does that project work and fit within the guidance. But I do think elements of it certainly could fit with, frankly, with any of those projects in the phase 2 bucket.
Mr. President.
Councilwoman Pro.
On the lines of Councilman Burnt's comment, I do have concerns that we would spend a year or maybe more kind of waiting to see what can come to be with phase 2 projects, and then find out in 2024 that we were not going to do what we thought we would do. And we've lost time on projects that we know we can do right away. So I really want to dig down next time into the timing of these, because I know with our other area partners, especially with Linder Road, we don't have full control over that process. So we can make some assumptions and have those conversations and possibly find ourselves another year from now still not being where we'd hoped we'd had, and we've missed some other timing opportunities. So but in regard to phase 1, I'm generally in agreement with all of those. I am intrigued by the biogas versus streetlights conversation. As far as the streetlights goes, I'm curious also what the breakdown is on that with cost of consultant versus cost of what it would cost us. Now, that is not necessarily a factor for whether I keep it in phase 1, but I just am wondering. And I think the biogas is a really good, thank you, Councilwoman Strader, for catching that, because I read about it and then it just didn't dawn on me that it's not in this list. So I think that project really makes sense. And it's good to have several options. So,
Ms. McVeigh, would you like to respond to that?
Councilman Pro, that's a great question. So we are estimating about 15 to 18% of the money would be towards consulting fees. That's a pretty standard that we pay on other public works projects.
Councilwoman Pro, in terms of phase 1 projects, so overall, I think we are going to take a vote tonight on phase 1 projects. So any additional thoughts on phase 1 you might want to add?
thank you, Council President Hoagland. My preference, and this is not to vote against the streetlights. My preference would be to move that over to phase 2 and put biogas in as a phase 1 project. That's my initial preference. But again, I don't have all the information yet. So I certainly don't want to hold up the streetlights project if that is something that we know is ready to go. We have the information, we're good with it, and it's a lot more likely to be completed rather than the biogas. But as far as return on investment, to me, the biogas project sounds like it's a better option for us. But as far as how we categorize phase 1, phase 2, if the streetlights upgrades, if we move it into phase 2, we have that conversation here in the next, I assume, couple of months, we could still get started on it fairly quickly. So as far as the timing goes, that would be my preference, moving the streetlights over to phase 2, moving biogas back into phase 1.
Mr. President?
Councilwoman Strader.
I think that's a good point because we have a backlog and we've already funded a lot of streetlight conversions that haven't happened. So I would think that moving that to phase 2 consideration and then putting the biogas project onto phase 1 would make a lot of sense. The biogas one, I didn't have a lot of questions about because it was really a straightforward project. Unless, I guess my only question would be, is there any concern about the biogas project? Any reason it's not ready and couldn't be included in phase 1 instead?
Orlai.
Councilwoman Strader. So we would, with both the biogas and the biosolids project, would need to do initial engineering studies on both of those that would really assess. So we've done the, rough ROI calculations where they do make sense. The engineering study would essentially do, probably like a 30% design that would tell us construction schedule, would give us a better cost estimate just in case we were off on any of those. And then that would be the kind of stuff that we could bring back to you guys and say, yes or no, or we found this big project flaw as we got into it. But we could do that activity, within the next 6 months.
Mr. President?
Councilwoman Strader.
I want to take a shot at I'd move the city council greenlight the phase one projects this evening to express our support for seeing future budget amendments with all the details. Putting the streetlight upgrades onto the phase two projects for further discussion, understanding the internal capacity to complete those projects and how a consulting engagement would work with that, and then moving the biogas project onto phase one.
We have a motion
Second.
and we have a second. Discussion. I do have a question, Dave. If we get into the biogas research and whatnot, and it's very complicated and there's issues and whatnot, do we have time to flip things back and forth from phase one to phase two, vice versa?
Council President, I think the short answer is yes. Ultimately, you've got the flexibility up until you commit funds. And I think even when you commit a fund, you can probably pull a project back. But we can certainly clarify that answer for you. And I did want to address, you made a very good comment, Councilwoman Pro, about timing, understanding there are other agencies involved with some of these larger phase two projects. The intent is that we come back to you rather quickly to have that discussion, not 6 months or 8 months down the road.
Great. Any other discussion? We have a motion. All those in favor of adopting the phase one projects as identified in the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All ayes. Motion carries. So there's your phase one projects. Dave.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, we're at the end of our agenda for our work session. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. All right, council, I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is our regular meeting. Here it's Tuesday, March 15th, 2022 at 6 p.m. Our first order of business is going to be roll call. So, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilwoman Strader,
Here.
Councilman Burnt,
Here.
Councilwoman Pro,
Here.
Councilman Borton,
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here. We do not have, our next item of business is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise and join us in the pledge. I don't think we have anybody here for the invocation tonight. So with that, we will move to the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. President,
Councilman Borton.
we have a few changes to the agenda. Item 4 needs to be vacated. Item 3 will be moved to the top of the agenda so we can set a date for a continuance of tonight's hearing to a new date in order for the applicant to correct public notice deficiencies related to the sign posting. Item 5 is requesting a continuance as well, so that public hearing will be opened for the sole purpose of continuing the hearing to a new date before we get to items 1 and 2. With that, I move that we adopt the agenda as modified.
Second. That was the longest motion.
Pretty good.
It was pretty good.
That was the second, Councilman Burnt.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as amended. Any discussion? Not all those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. We have adopted the agenda as amended. Our next item, Mr. Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for the public forum?
Mr. President, we did not.
Okay. We are to our action items. And I think you had said, Councilman Borton, that item 3 was at the top of the public hearing list to take action upon.
Yes, Mr. President.
So we will open the public hearing for item number 3, H 2021-0083 Friendship Subdivision. With the hearing open, Alan, do you want to inform us what's transpiring?
Members of the council, this was a posting error. Applicant did not post a sign on a stub street where they were supposed to post it. One of the neighbors caught it a couple of days ago, so they cannot be heard tonight. It will be continued. They're recommending until April 5th.
All right, then. What's the pleasure of the council?
Mr. President.
Councilman Borton.
Continue H 2021-0083 to April 5th.
We have a motion second to continue the public hearing to April 5th. Is there any discussion? Not? Yes, Alan. Okay, thought you were ready to say something. With that, all those in favor of continuing the public hearing to April 5th, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. The hearing is continued. And that did not include item 4, did it? We're going, 4's gone. So, all right. So back to ordinance number 22-1972. This is our item of business. It's an ordinance repealing and replacing Meridian City Code. Basically, that is going to divide our city up into, yes, sir.
Mr. President, did you want to discuss item 5? That was in the motion to move that to the top.
Oh, thank you. I missed that. Item 5, Jamestown Ranch subdivision, H 2021-0074. We'll open the public hearing for that. And Alan, again, comments?
Mr. President, members of the council, I guess I'm batting well tonight. Case went to the planning commission. It's very complicated. Since the time of the planning commission, I've gotten some feedback from the Settlers Irrigation District that there are some inconsistencies in the plans and the civil drawings, and that there's some improvements that maybe or may not have occurred without ACHD's permission. There was a big meeting that happened that I really wasn't involved with, and we told the applicant to get this figured out before they come to council.
Great.
Pretty good advice.
All right. And they've asked that to be continued to April 5th. That my,
They believe they'll have it resolved by April 5th.
okay, council, what would you like to do with public hearing H 2021-0074?
Mr. President,
Councilman Borton.
that explanation, I move that we continue H 2021-0074 to the hearing on April 5th.
Do we have a second?
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second to continue the public hearing to April 5th for H 2021-0074. All those in favor of continuing the public hearing, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. It will be continued to April 5th. Now let's go to ordinance number 22-1972. Mr. Neri, are you providing comments for staff comments for this one?
So, Mr. President, members of the council, so this is the third reading of our districting ordinance. Again, just to refresh from the requirements of the Idaho Code is because we are now a city of over 100,000 people, we are required to create districts for our council seats. This is to create a district system for our 2023 election. The idea was to create a committee system that would then be selected by the mayor, approved by the council. The committee would then meet, have public hearings to determine how the district should be formed within the city. Districts need to be formed generally as close as possible to the same population base to divide that by 6. Again, I think our number from the census was 117,000 and change. So the desire here is this is simply the mechanism to begin that process. The idea is hopeful to begin this process fairly soon. The process has been completed at the state and county level, so we can begin this process at the city level, and we're hoping to get this done throughout the summer and hopefully have a final product before this council by the end of the summer of this year. So that's our intent to move this forward. Again, this is just the mechanism to do it. This is the third reading, so it is eligible to be approved tonight.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Neri?
Mr. President.
Yes, Councilman Borton.
Just to comment on it, one of the principles that I appreciate with this process is that it's simply a math equation, that this thing is designed to ensure that 6 districts have equal representation within them, and the city council is purposely and intentionally not part of any of the line drawing. We don't play any role in it. We're not interested in how that works. We just want it to be lawful, and it's designed that way, so I appreciate that.
Thank you for those comments, Councilman Borton. Mr. Clerk, do we have anybody who signed up for this public hearing?
Mr. President, we did not.
Okay. Do we have anybody online who would like to participate in this public hearing? I don't see anybody who's raised their, if you do, please raise your hand, but I don't see anybody from the public online. It's not city staff. All right. What would the council like to do with this ordinance?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Burnt.
Mr. President.
Oh, Mr. President. You're going to be mayor someday.
Councilman Pro.
Perhaps I missed it, but I didn't hear if you asked if there was anybody in the audience that had a.
Yes, we asked for, oh, yeah, audience. Anybody in the audience want to testify? Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, we got signups online and audience. Okay. Forgot my rule of 3 there. Yep. Good idea.
Mr. President, I would like to move that we close the public hearing on this item.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of closing the public hearing on ordinance number 22-1972, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. And the public hearing is closed.
Mr. President,
Councilman Burnt.
I move that we approve ordinance number 22-1972.
Second.
Mr. President.
We have a motion, a second to approve ordinance number 22-1972. Mr. Neri.
So, Mr. President, members of the council, this is actually on your ordinance section of the agenda. So it's item 6
Oh,
on your agenda. So it'll get read by title like our normal ordinance process. We just could do it at that point. That'd be fine.
So we have motion to withdraw, maker of the motion, withdraw the motion. Second agrees. Okay, we've motions withdrawn. Second agrees. We will then work on that and coming up here a little bit later. Up next is a public hearing for SHP 2022-003. We'll open this public hearing with comments by staff. Alan?
Thank you. Members of the council, Alan Tiefenbach, Associate Planner. So I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can say for the first time, Mr. President and members of the council, haven't gotten to say that before. This is an application for a short plat for 2 commercial lots. The property consists of about a little more than 1.5 acres, zoned CN, located at 1850 West Everest Lane, which southwest corner of Shinden and Linder-ish. Quick history. Property was annexed into the city in 2002 and rezoned R4 at that time. It was the Loxa Falls subdivision. In 2004, it was platted as the Loxa Falls subdivision number 12, and then it was rezoned to CN in 2007. There's a landscape buffer that is already existing along Shinden. The community plan, or sorry, the comprehensive plan designates this as mixed-use community. This proposal is to subdivide a commercial lot into 2 commercial lots. Staff is recommending approval of this. On the left is the short plat. On the right is the concept plan. The concept plan, I guess one thing that council should be aware of, that the concept plan is shown right now, shows access from 2 points. West Everest Lane actually runs along the south, and then it also runs along the east. And this is a private road on the south and a private drive on the east. However, on the east, West Everest Road is in a different subdivision plat. Again, it's a private road. At this point, we don't have any proof from the applicant about whether or not they have legal access to that road on the east. Not saying that they don't have it. However, until we see that proof of access, we can only bring this to you with access coming from the south, because we know they have access from the south. So that was a condition of approval, is that the applicant would either have to provide proof of access that they can get the access to the road to the east, or they would have to completely reconfigure the site to take access from the south. The only other thing is very standard, is that staff is requiring that they provide cross access between the 2 lots, lot 1, lot 2. So if they sell off one lot, the other lot would still have access. With that, staff is recommending approval.
Thank you, Alan. Any questions for staff at this time? All right. I'm sorry, Councilwoman Pro.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Alan, so what were to happen if they could not get access on the east? I mean, are people going to turn around and head back west to leave? I mean, what would the vehicles do if they had no easterly access?
So this is just a conceptual site plan here. They would have to reconfigure this site plan. If the access doesn't occur, if they don't get access to the east, then this site plan, as they're shown right here, is not going to work. Really, the only reason why we usually require these site plans with short plats is for them to demonstrate that they have enough lot room to be able to configure whatever use that they're proposing there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, is the applicant here? Wish to testify? And if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. Stephanie Hopkins with KM Engineering, 5725 North Discovery Way in Boise, 83713. Staff did a great job summarizing our requests, so I'll keep my comments short so you don't have to sit through a presentation. We do have a recorded cross-access agreement that I will be sure to submit to staff when we do our final plat. So in regard to the access that was mentioned, and then we're working on the other conditions as well. Other than that, we agree with the staff report in the conditions, and I can stand for questions if you have them.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any questions for the applicant?
Mr. President,
Councilwoman Pro.
question asker tonight. Good to see you, Stephanie.
See you.
We've had hearings, well, it's probably been a few years now, on along Everest Lane, sorry, and there is a lot of traffic from Challenger School. And I know that there was an attempt to address that with putting some parking signs and striping and different things on that private lane. Has that resolved the issues and going from a use of one company to 2 companies? How much, I mean, I know you you may not know who is going to fill these sites, but what kind of traffic are we looking at right next to the school, given all of the issues that have happened?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pearl, I'm not sure exactly. I know that at one point there were some discussions of taking the common lot and decreasing it to allow for more parking further west along Everest Lane. I don't know that if they experience, we have the owner here too tonight, and he can probably address this question because he's been involved with it for quite a while. But I don't know for sure if we've looked at traffic calming or anything specifically along this parcel. I know for one of the proposed users is going to be a budget blinds facility that's, I think it's 8,100 square feet. And I believe it's over parked for the number of, the amount of square footage that's going to be there. And we'd be sure to include enough parking for both of the users. I don't know if Bob, you want to come up and talk about traffic? Thanks.
And sir, if you could state your name and address for the record, please. Thank you.
Bob Hozak, owner developer, 63 West River Bridge Lane in Eagle, Idaho. Councilwoman, on Everest Lane, we painted both sides of the curb red and we put up no parking signs. And that resolved the parking that was on Everest Lane. And so now traffic flows better both east and west on Everest. And so I think we resolved the parking. Then we purposely overparked both of these. So we have plenty of on-site parking for both of these users on this new site. And we overparked on the project we just finished on it. We have not had a traffic problem, although you're right. In the morning at Challenger School and in the evening at Challenger School, come in and dump out. There's a lot of cars. What we're going to do on this particular plat here on this one is we're down in the southeast corner of this lot. And by the way, we do have the recorded easement done to have access on the east side. That's done. We're going to round that corner off down there and open that up so we have a better flow of traffic on that southeast. It's square right now, and it's a little bit of a problem.
Thank you. All right, this is a public hearing. Do we have anybody signed up, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, we did not.
Okay, let me ask then, do we have anybody? I'm looking in the room, don't see anybody that is not unfamiliar to me. So is there anybody in the audience who would like to testify? Practice, extra credit? Okay. With that, would the applicant like to close?
President, I don't have anything else to add. We're excited to subdivide this so we can develop it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Oh, council?
Mr. President,
Councilman Borton.
with that presentation, I move that we close the public hearing on SHP 2022-0003.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Any discussion? All those in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Public hearing is closed.
Mr. President,
Councilman Borton.
considering all staff and applicant and public, well, not public testimony, but staff and applicant comment, I move that we approve SHP 2022-0003.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the item number 2 on our agenda, SHP 2022-0003. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none?
President,
Yes, Councilwoman Schrader.
it's great to see businesses succeeding here in Meridian. Appreciate you helping to facilitate that.
Great. Mr. Clerk, would you please call roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Strater,
Aye.
Burnt, Perot.
Aye.
Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye. All ayes, motion carries. With that, that comes to ordinances. So, Mr. Clerk, would you please read the ordinances by title only?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the third reading of ordinance 22-1972, an ordinance repealing and replacing Meridian City Code Section 171 regarding elections, districts, terms of office, residency requirement, amending Meridian City Code 172 regarding city council member qualifications, repealing and replacing Meridian City Code 174 regarding city council seat vacancies, adding a new section of Meridian City Code Section 1711 regarding Meridian Districting Committee, city council districts, adopting a savings clause and providing an effective date.
You've heard the ordinance read by title. Does anybody desire it to be read in its entirety? And we notice Ralph isn't here tonight. Hearing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. President, is there a motion?
Oh, that's right. We need a motion. Sorry about that. Thank you. Motion on this ordinance.
Mr. President,
Councilman Borton.
we approve ordinance 22-1972.
We have a motion, a second to approve ordinance number 22-1972. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Strater.
Aye.
Burnt. Burrow.
Aye.
Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye. All ayes. Ordinance has been adopted. Now we have ordinance number 22-1973. Could the clerk please read this by title?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an ordinance related to Aviator Springs, H 2021-0065, for annexation of an area of land being the northeast 1/4 of the southeast 1/4 of Section 32, Township 4 North, Range 1 West, Ada County, Idaho, and being more particularly described in Attachment A, and annexing certain lands and territory situated in Ada County, Idaho, and adjacent and contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Meridian as requested by the city of Meridian. Establishing and determining the land use zoning classification of 40.0 acres of land from RUT to R8 medium density residential, 27.63 acres, LO limited office 1.64 acres, and ME mixed employment 10.72 acres, zoning district in the Meridian City Code. Providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing for a summary of the ordinance and providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
We've heard the reading of ordinance 22-1973 by title. Is anybody who'd like to hear it read in its entirety? Just to point out, we are the legislative body here for the city, and since the state legislature seems to like reading bills in full, no one wants to take that opportunity here, huh? Okay. Do we have a motion on this ordinance?
Mr. President,
Councilwoman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 22-1973 with the suspension of rules.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to approve ordinance 22-1973 with suspension of rules. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. President. Strater.
Aye.
Burnt. Burrow.
Aye.
Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye. All ayes, motion carries. Now before us is ordinance number 22-1974. Will the clerk please read this bill by title, ordinance by title?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is an ordinance related to Rackham East annexation H 2021-0075 for annexation of a parcel of land being lots 13 through 16, Block 1, lots 8 through 12, Block 2 of Rolling Hill subdivision, Book 18 of plats at page 1202, records of Ada County, and unplatted land situated in a portion of the northwest 1/4 of the southeast 1/4 of Section 16, Township 3 North, Range 1 East, Ada County, Idaho, and being more particularly described in Attachment A, and annexing certain lands and territories situated in Ada County, Idaho, and adjacent and contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Meridian as requested by the city of Meridian. Establishing and determining the land use zoning classification of 25.76 acres of land from RUT to CG General Commercial 13.76 acres and R40 High Density Residential 12.00 acres. Zoning districts in the Meridian City Code. Providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing for a summary of the ordinance and providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
You've just heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anyone who wishes to hear the ordinance read in full? Young lady's last chance to be on the record. Extra credit. All right, then. We have a motion on this ordinance.
Mr. President,
Councilwoman Pro.
first I'd like to say I think Chris has a future as an auctioneer. I move that we approve ordinance number 22-1974 with the suspension of rules.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to adopt ordinance number 22-1974 with suspension of rules. Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Strater.
Aye.
Burnt. Aye. Burrow.
Aye.
Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye. All ayes, the ordinance is adopted. With that, we've come to our next topic, which is future meeting topics. Do we have anything to bring up about future meeting topics?
Mr. President,
Councilman Borton.
just briefly, there's been a lot of public input and questions about the trophy that sits over my shoulder. I just wanted to explain briefly, that trophy actually is the Garage Time Fantasy Football League Championship that I was able to win this year. There's been a lot of questions and input asking about how that happened, so I just wanted to clear the record. First, by thanking Mike Hanneman, the Garage Time host, Roger Higginbotham, our commissioner, who does a fantastic job every year, and to Jimmy Carr. Jimmy Carr, as most of you don't know, traded me his second and third round picks. And with those picks, I was able to get Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel. That paved the way for a great season, ultimately leading to a Garage Time championship and the trophy that sits over my shoulder. So a lot of people to thank, a lot of good folks involved in winning the championship. I'm proud to just display it here in City Hall. Great efforts from a great league, and appreciate those folks that made it all happen.
Oh, Councilman Borton, please accept my congratulations, but please know there will not be a parade thrown in your honor.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burton.
Mr. President, excuse me, any cap part discussion this evening? No? Okay,
Just trophies.
just trophies.
Well, let's go to the final item on the agenda, and that is adjournment. Do we have a motion?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned.